Hi, my name's Chris Caesar. I'm a professional landscape photographer based out of my studios here in Scrooby. Welcome to this, the third series of my 4 seasons in print, series of short videos where I attempt to look at some of the images that I've made over the years in the different seasons and discuss how they were made, maybe the inspirations behind them, and then chat about the choice of paper for each of those images. Paper is an incredibly important thing for me. The choice of paper, whether it's matte or glossy, whether it has a texture or a stipple or it's ultra smooth, it does change the way an image looks and feels. So for example, if we shoot something that's a little bit more arty, maybe a waterfall or a misty scene, we might want to move more towards an arty finish, which would bring in, for example, a matte paper. We can then look at adding texture to those images. If we want to be more traditional, then we tend to use a gloss paper. And then we get choices of like a really smooth, clean gloss, a slightly stippled satin, or maybe a slightly more heavily stippled Baryta type paper if we really want to hark back to those old F-type Baryta papers from the past. So in this video, I'll be looking at the 4 seasons. So we're going to kick off with spring in a second, and we'll look at 5 images from each of the seasons. And I'm going to chat through my thoughts about them and, as I say, the choice of paper. I am an ambassador for the Canson Infinity range of fine art paper. It's an honour to work with them, to be honest. The papers, I believe, are groundbreaking and second to none. And I'm going to try and give you my reasoning behind that during these episodes. The images you see, as well as using Canson Infinity papers throughout, they've all been printed using a Canon Pro-300 A3 pigment ink printer. I still get asked a lot when I do talks at clubs and societies across the UK about, is there an affordable printer that people can buy where they're not compromising on finished sort of image quality, the quality of the photographic print. And the Canon Pro-300, the only drawback that it's got is it goes up to A3+. So if you want to do bigger prints, then obviously it can't do that. But for A3+ and down, it's absolutely superb. The ink set is brilliant. The new matte black that's been there now for, 18 months, a couple of years, allows you to get really deep blacks down on matte papers. So if you can marry a super matte paper with a high Dmax, like some of the papers that Canson make, Dmax means the ability to show black. If you can marry that with a matte black ink that can really get deep blacks down on that matte paper, then you're opening up avenues that really maybe 10, 15 years ago weren't there. But the fact that we can now get really good blacks on the matte papers means that there's no compromise if we're using matte as opposed to shiny. So all the prints have been made on that Pro-300, and everything you see is going to have been made on Canson Infinity papers. So I'm going to kick off with the spring episode, and I've got 5 pictures here to show you. Let's crack on, and we can have a chat about them and see why I've chosen certain papers to go with certain photographs. So if I can get the gloves on. We don't like to touch prints with fingers because we've got acid in our fingers and oils, and they can go on the paper surface, and over time they might just affect the way the paper behaves. So if you're handling your prints, do get a pair of cotton gloves. So here's image 1 in 4 seasons in print, series 3, episode 1, spring. This is a picture that was made up at Derwentwater in the Lake District, and it was made at the end of a very long day. But luckily, I tend to make my pictures not in summer. I do go out in summer. I do different things in summer. But when it's not summer, I tend to shoot early and late, like a lot of us would, because we get the drama, we get the light, we get the conditions. The good news of that is the days aren't terribly long. So if this, for example, was made in January, February, then it's sunset at 4 o'clock. So it's a nice sort of 8 till 4 day. It's easy to stay out all day. You're never tired. You never feel as though you want to have a rest. So you're always thinking, and you're in a good position to produce nice work, I always think. So this is made not in the summer. And this is probably round about 30 minutes after sunset. So we've got the last little bit of what we call afterglow, the intensity is going, and that sort of deep orange that you get after the sun's gone down. Give it 15-20 minutes and you'll notice the sky sometimes starts to colour up. That fades just right at the end of it, and we get these sort of more subtle sort of yellowy tones going on. And you can see we've got a little bit of light left in the blue sky. Very shortly that's going to be turning into night time, and then everything ends and it's time to go for a beer. This picture, I've kind of gone for almost a 50-50 split. The amount of sky that I use in a picture is often dictated by the sky itself. In this picture, because it's getting dark, and I have got filters on the sky, I've got ND grad filters just trying to balance up this light to get a little bit more light in this mid area. Because of the long exposure, we get some movement in the clouds, which I always think is quite nice. It just makes it a little bit more painterly by having some smears of colour. And obviously the water, it's not totally flat. You can see here, there isn't a perfect reflection going on, so there is a little bit of a ripple. Some of it's flatter here, right in the sort of foreground, just in the shallows, for example, it's a little bit more calm. But we've got some nice bands of interest here. We've got an element at the bottom. We've got this band of rocks, which are just adding interest all across the floor with some of the reflected colours. Then we've got the middle ground, which is the sort of islands and the distant mountains. And then we've got this lovely sort of blurry, long exposed sky. So when I look at this picture, I get a sense of serenity, tranquility, calm, peacefulness. It's also, because of the long exposure and the time of the day that I shot it, it's quite painterly as an image. So rather than use a traditional gloss for this one, as I often do with painterly subjects, I've used a matte paper. So by using matte, I feel as though there's an instant sort of move towards an arty reproduction rather than the traditional gloss. Now there are choices with matte. We've got smooth matte, textured matte, heavily textured matte. This is a smooth matte. This is one of my favourite papers. It's called Arches 88. Arches is spelled A-R-C-H-E-S. Arches 88 is a smooth matte cotton rag. It's, to my knowledge, still the only smooth matte paper that's pure white with no optical brightness. An optical brightener is like a bleaching agent. This can be added to paper to make it brighter, whiter, but obviously the things that are in those bleaching agents could affect the colours in your print over time. So most fine art paper tends to be a slightly warm white. We call it natural white. But if you want to make it white, it's very difficult. Canson have achieved it by working with natural minerals. So we've now got this bright white finish, but no chance of anything happening to the print over time. The archival characteristics of it are fantastic. Another of the key things I like about it is its ability to show black. For a matte paper, it's got a very, very high Dmax. When you mix that with the matte black ink from the Canon Pro-300, we can make some stunning black and white pictures as well. But this isn't a black and white picture. However, it's still got a dynamic tonal range. We've still got bright areas and dark areas. So we need the result to show that. And this paper works perfectly. So we get this nice smooth finish showing lots of detail that works well with that feeling of peacefulness and serenity without adding anything else for you to see. So that's the first picture today, and it's called Under a Sunset Sky, Derwent Water. Okay, here's the second picture of this spring episode. Now this is more of a traditional shot. Although I spend most of my time, like most landscapers do, studying fields, moorland, water, swamps, dunes, standing, waiting for sunup, hours in the cold in winter. After 20 years of that, sometimes you feel the need to have a break. So I run workshops in some major cities like Venice, Prague, Rome, Budapest. This is one of the pictures I made in Venice. Most of the Venice workshop, although we're in a city, it's still based around sunrise and sunset. We've got the Grand Canal, we've got shots across the lagoon, and then we've got little sort of city scenes as well, maybe by the bridges, where the canals are by the bridges at night, maybe with a street lamp adding drama on a corner as the canal turns. So there's lots of things we can do other than traditional landscapes, but there's also lots of traditional landscapes and landscapes that meet cityscapes. So I really like going to places like Venice. And one of the things that I do is at some stage of the workshop, we'll take a Vaporetto ride, the number 2, around Venice. So it goes up the Grand, you can either go up the Grand Canal and then around the back to the start, or you can go around the back up the Giudecca Canal and come down the Grand Canal. This day, I think, was one of the days where we went around the back and then came down the Grand Canal. So the idea is we shoot handheld, we sit on the boat at the back, and we just choose a side, and whatever comes past, we shoot. So this was a shot made around about 100th of a second, 24 to 70mm Canon lens on a Canon R5. And it's just a shot that tries to capture daily life in Venice. So, I've been to Venice quite a few times now. Got lots of nice pictures, lots of nice landscapes, and I'm starting to explore more their daily life and, things like monochrome shots at night, that kind of photography. So this shot, I quite like it. We've got a few areas of interest here, and there's a nice little balance to it where the subjects are placed. So, for example, top right, we've got this little Hotel Marconi sign, which is diagonally opposite some gondolas that are just waiting there for some customers later on. Then in this corner, we've got a scene where people are sitting in a cafe, having coffee, reading the paper. And then up diagonally opposite that, we've got a nice area where we can see some traditional Venetian buildings and colours. This is all sort of Byzantine architecture. Most of Venice is Byzantine. It's simple squares, simple curved arches, not Gothic arches. And this is traditional, typical of Byzantine. So for this print, because it's kind of a traditional photograph, I wanted to use a traditional paper. And this is a paper that I use a lot, whether it's landscape or this kind of image. This is a paper called Platine Fibre Rag from the guys at Canson Infinity. Now, Platine, if you're using rolls, it's the best paper you'll ever play with. It's got a lovely pliable back. This fibre back means that when you print, say, I don't know, say you've got an A1 printer and you're printing a 36 by 24 inch image off a roll, you don't tend to get heavy recoil. It tends to lay reasonably flat, so you can work with it, which is a blessing. So I really like this paper for the way it handles, but also it's fantastic at showing photographs in a traditional way. It's brilliant at handling midtones. This picture, for example, is full of midtones. It's got lots of reds in and, sort of bits of grey and whatever. Nothing too bright, nothing too dark. But it's the level of detail that it produces that's always amazed me. I'm really, really pleased when I use this paper and I see the results come off the printer. The printer itself, the Pro-300, one of the colours that's in there, apart from the fantastic matte black, which hasn't been used on this because this is a shiny paper, glossy paper, so it's used the photo black. But they also have a cartridge which is called red. And I'm convinced that the red, it doesn't just get used for reds, it gets mixed in with lots of colours like yellow and whatever when they want to make sort of oranges and warmer tones. So I think the red is a real good addition too. So with this printer, you're getting the new matte black and you're getting that red. So the output for me is more accurate, and it's just whatever you want it to be. It'll reproduce what you've got on your calibrated screen without any problems. So I find the printer and the inkset fantastic, and it works brilliantly with the Canson Infinity range of fine art papers, which is another big plus, because a lot of the printers that aren't terribly expensive, they'll struggle with some of the fine art matte papers, but I've yet to find a problem with any of them on the Pro-300. This is a slightly glossy paper. If I do this, hopefully you can see it's got a slight sheen. The Platine Fibre Rag, it's what I would call a satin finish, very, very slight stipple to it, slight speckle. So it's not like a smooth, glassy paper, and it's not a slightly more stippled paper like a fine art Baryta might be, which has got more of a stipple, more of an orange peel effect. So it's a nice satin finish, produces great results, and it works perfectly with images like this, and that's why I chose it. So that's image 2 in this episode. Okay, so third image in this spring episode is this image. This is called Eric Tracy at Gromont, North York Moors Railway. And this fella here, this is the Eric Tracy steam locomotive or steam engine. And this was made on a workshop on the Yorkshire coast. So we're not by the seaside. Sometimes on the Yorkshire coast, remember we're there for 4 full days. So it's nice to just have a little break from standing, look at the seascapes and beers and, bits of beach. And it's only 15-minute drive to the North York Moors Railway. And if the workshop's running when the engines are running, then it's always a nice little extra for people to have a go at. I love the railway stations on the North York Moors. They're full of detail. They're full of signals and station houses and cafes and railings. And there's so much character there if you want to look for it. And I think on the last series, I put a black and white picture from this same station, Gromont, but it was just a little bit further down the track across the crossing that had lots of those little features that you'd find at sort of steam railways. This one is the Eric Tracy's just here. He is ready to head off this way, which is back to Pickering. It's a funny little track. If they come this way towards Whitby, they're going backwards. And if they come this way towards Pickering, they're going forwards. So it's always nice to shoot them going towards Pickering. But it's a simple little shot. It's almost a 50-50 split. If you look, there's round, 3/3, let's say. We've got some foreground, the engine, and then we've got this nice sky with the tree. Just positioned him off to the left there so we can bring in this lamp and this building. And as well as the tracks here, I wanted to show a little bit more of, sort of capture the feel of a railway a little bit more. So by having the other track, if that makes sense. And then you've just got a hint of the platform going off down into the distance. But it's a nice clean image. The engine looks fantastic. And I've printed this one just to show you that the paper that I've just talked about, the Platine Fibre Rag, which I talk about shooting midtones and colours and whatever, it's also fantastic for monochrome work. So you can see it's the same satin paper, but this time I've asked it to do quite a striking black and white image with quite a high tonal range. So we've got some quite bright areas going on, and then we've got the deep blacks of the engine. But the Platine Fibre Rags handled it with ease. There is a paper that I'll show you in a couple of images' time, which has the highest, one of the highest Dmaxes of any paper in the world. But the Platine has always handled everything I've thrown at it. But I'll tell you why I use the other paper in a couple of pictures' time. So for this image, I chose Platine Fibre Rag again because I wanted that traditional feel of a traditional darkroom paper, but I wanted to use a paper that could handle detail and handle the tonal range. So that's why I chose this paper. So that's image number 3. Okay, so this is image 4, the penultimate image of this first episode of this series. And this is a picture called The Dune, Ross Sands. So this is up in Northumberland. Last year, one of my friends had a 60th birthday and a group of us went up and stayed at a couple of cottages in Bamborough. And we went off, obviously doing lots of photography. And this was one afternoon. We went for a drive to Ross Sands. It's not an area I know well. Been before, just remembered it being this beautiful, vast beach with dunes, and that's what it turned out to be. So nothing had changed. Nothing ever changes up there. Lovely place to go. So we worked on the beach, and it was early to mid-afternoon, so the sun was starting to sort of set. Because again, this would have been sort of January, February time, so dark at 4:15. So this might have been somewhere around about 2:30. But the sun's starting to get lower, so it's starting to catch these bits on the top, which is sort of casting shadows across the beach. And I quite liked this. I stood and looked at this a couple of times before I eventually made an image, because I was just waiting for this sort of shadows to be, right. And it's a very simple image. It's quite, minimalist in the way it's set up. There's not an awful lot to look at. It relies heavily on the dune and these little bits of light here and the little bits of grasses that are peeping through. Over here, for reference, we've got Lindisfarne Castle on the hill. We've got a nice sky, nice typical late afternoon sky. We've got some blue there, which sort of complements the blue sea. And it's almost a 50-50 here, if you look at where the castle is. So we're trying to just concentrate really on the dune. And this is the result that we've got. So because it's quite minimalist, we've ended up with a picture that's quite clean and free from lots of distractions. So for that one, I've decided that it's got a slightly arty feel therefore. And again, I've wanted to use a matte paper. But this time I've used one of the new matte papers from Canson. And it's a paper that's made here in the UK down at the Somerset Velvet Mills down at Wells. And I will be showing you the new Somerset Velvet Enhanced later on. But for now, this is the new Somerset Watercolour 240 gram. This is a textured matte paper. So if I give it a wiggle, you'll see there are no reflections. Textured matte paper. It's similar pattern to the BFK Reeve that Canson make, for those that know that. And the reason I've used the texture is to just put a little bit of texture into this sky. So rather than keeping it smooth like on the first image of this episode, I've wanted to keep this a little bit. I've wanted to just put something in there to make it look a little bit more, let's say, watercolory. Like you'll get a watercolour paper, they tend to paint on a textured paper. So I'm trying to give that effect. But it doesn't detract at all from the detail in the foreground and the grasses. There's a picture coming up in one of the later episodes where I print monochrome on this as well, which is quite striking. So it's a lovely little paper, a little bit lighter, so not as expensive, and also it's going to be easier for some printers to handle because it's only 240 gram instead of 310. But it does have a really, really good tonal range. The thing that I like about it, other than all the things I've said, is that it's made on a cylinder mould. So there are 3 new papers from the Somerset Mill, and it's St Cuthbert's Mill down at Wells. I call it Somerset Mill. So at St Cuthbert's Mill, there are 3 new papers in the Canson range. You've got Somerset Satin, Somerset Velvet, and the Somerset Watercolour. But they're all made on a cylinder mould. So all the matte papers from Canson Infinity, the new Arch range, so the Arch 88, BFK Reeve, Aquarelle, they're all made on cylinder mould. And a cylinder mould is just a different way. It's a more traditional way of making paper. It's almost like handmade paper. The fibres are twice as long as on a Fourdrinier machine that makes most modern museum grade fine art papers, which are very good. But on the cylinder mould, the fibres are twice as long. The fibres also lay in different directions, so it's got a heck of a lot of integrity. And for me, they make the finest matte papers that you can make. There's not many. I think there's about a dozen cylinder moulds in the world. Canson have one in France and one in the UK. So it's cylinder mould made and a pleasure to use, and it will be archival for hundreds of years. So that's the paper I chose for this image, and that's image number 4 on this first episode. Okay, this is the final image from today's episode, Spring. And this is a picture that I made up on the right on the northwestern tip of the North York Moors in a place called Newton under Rosebery Woods. So I'll call it Newton Woods. And Newton Woods is lovely when the bluebells are out. We've got roseberry topping on the top. You drop down from there and there's this whole band, this little pathway that walks through the woods. There's bluebells everywhere. You've got bluebells in the open, you've got bluebells under the trees. So whilst waiting for the light to get a little bit softer to shoot the open field, I had a little walk round the path and under some of the trees. And I found this little tree, or big tree. And I was drawn to the way that the branches kind of lean over the bluebells. It's almost like they're caressing them, like they're trying to tell them something. So it's an interesting picture, but it's full of contrast. So we've got light and dark in the bluebells down here. We've got sort of half-toned shadowy areas of the trees and bits where the trees are lit. So it's full of contrast. And for images like this, that are full of contrast, I always think that they might work well on something like an aluminium. you know, like a glossy aluminium print, like a Chromolux. But the paper equivalent would be a high gloss paper. So this is the Baryta Prestige II from Canson Infinity. Now, they've got the matte papers that I've told you about that are all, you know, they're all pure white with no optical brighteners. But this is a Baryta paper with a barium sulfate coating that's also what we're classifying as pure white, and it also has no optical brightness. So if you do need to get whites down, so say for example, I don't know, you might be shooting waterfalls or a wedding dress or a really beautiful white cloud, we can now render white, whereas before it was a slightly warm white. So I really like the Baryta Prestige II because it opens up new avenues for me. So on this picture, by using this paper and the beautiful inks on the Canon Pro-300, so again we've got beautiful blacks, we've got the red helping us out, but the result is a really punchy, dramatic, contrasty photograph that harks back to the old Baryta papers of the past. It's a beautifully heavy paper, is the Baryta Prestige II. It feels really strong and substantial, and I have a lot of pleasure when I use it, and I get results that are very vibrant, that shout out. So that's the final image from today. So over the course of the next 3 episodes, we'll be chatting about obviously lots of different images. There's another paper, the Somerset Velvet, that I'll be talking about as well, together also looking at the black and white from the watercolour, and there'll be a black and white from that velvet. So we're going to get to see lots of different results on lots of different types of paper. But for now, I shall leave you in peace, and until the next episode, thank you.